Halls Lake, Haliburton, Highlands, Ontario, July 1957, 8:30 in the evening. Robert Sutherland struck a match against the strip on the side of the box, and, by its short orange light, found the lamp wick before the flame reached his fingers. The same small operation, at roughly the same hour, on every clear evening of every July and August for 11 summers, since the year he and Jean had put up their two-room cabin themselves, on a lot off the Lake Road, north of Minden. There had been no proper road wide enough for a delivery truck that first year. There still wasn't much of one. The match caught the wick. The chimney glass went from black to gold. And for the fourth time that week, 7-year-old Callum stopped whatever he was doing on the cabin floor and moved, without being told to, into the 6 feet of light the lamp now threw across the table. His sister Fiona, 11, was already there, a half-dealt hand of cards in front of her. She had claimed the chair nearest the lamp an hour earlier, before the sky past the screen door had finished going purple, not because anyone made her, but because there was, after dark in this particular cabin, exactly one seat worth having, and every one of them knew which chair that was without ever once discussing it. What Robert Sutherland was doing when he struck that match was not, strictly speaking, lighting a room. He was performing the one nightly act that decided where 4 people would sit, how much of each other's faces they would be able to see, and how close together they were going to be for the next several hours. And he had been doing it precisely enough, for long enough, that neither he nor Jean had ever had to say out loud what the lamp was actually for. What was that single circle of lamplight organizing in the Sutherland cabin each night, and what did it cost Robert and Jean, summer after summer, to keep it lit? What the lamp organized began well before it was lit. A coal oil lamp, the same type most Canadians called a kerosene lamp, though in Haliburton cottage country the older term coal oil was still the one people used, was not a fixture you simply switched on. Its glass chimney collected soot every single evening it burned, and by morning it needed wiping clean with a rag, or the flame would burn dirty and dim the following night. Its wick needed trimming square with scissors every few days, or it would smoke and blacken the glass twice as fast. Its reservoir needed filling from a coal oil can kept, for safety, outside the cabin door, never near the wood stove, never near a child's reach after dark. Every one of these tasks belonged to Robert. Jean's evening task was different, deciding, by the particular quality of the light left in the sky, exactly when the lamp needed lighting at all. Too early wasted fuel that had to be portaged in by boat or car from Minden. Too late meant someone stumbling over a chair in the dark. None of this was written down anywhere. It did not need to be. It was simply what a family had to do. Every clear evening, if it wanted the one thing electricity gives most households automatically, a lit room to be in after the sun went down. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you've been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of the Canadian cottage and campfire summer between 1920 and 1980, what the cabin was, what the lamp or the campfire or the dock conversation gave the family who kept the ritual, and what they were actually building when they came back to the same lake summer after summer. Not nostalgia for old photographs, the documented social meaning of a ritual a generation of Canadian families arranged their year around. A lamp cabin gave a family something a fully wired house rarely manages on its own: one lit room, and no good reason for anyone to be anywhere else in it. And if you spent your summers at a cottage like this, or your family did, put it in the comments. Did your family cottage have electricity when you were young, or do you remember the one lamp that had to be lit, by hand, every single night? Next time, the island cottages of Georgian Bay, where a neighbor's fire seen across dark water was the only sign that anyone else was out there at all. Back to the fire. What did keeping that lamp lit, night after night, demand of a family that a light switch never would? What the lamp actually produced, once lit, was not merely visibility, it was a boundary. Everything inside its 6 or 7 feet of reach was legible: a face, a hand of cards, the print on a page. Everything beyond it dropped away into a darkness that was, in a cabin with no other light source anywhere, genuinely total. Fiona had learned this within her first summer at the lake, young enough that she could not have explained it in these words. There was no second-best seat in the room after dark. There was the lit half of the table, and there was everywhere else. And so the family's evening geometry rearranged itself around a piece of furniture that, in daylight, was nothing more than a brass base and a glass chimney sitting unremarkably on a shelf. Bedtime in the Sutherland cabin was never announced with a clock, because there was no clock either parent consulted for it. It was announced by the wick. When Robert reached over and turned the small brass key down, the flame shrank. The 6-foot circle of light contracted toward the lamp itself, and the shadows the family had been sitting inside of all evening climbed the log walls and gathered on the ceiling, larger and softer than they had been a minute before. Callum knew what that particular shrinking light meant before he was old enough to read a clock face at all. It meant the room was about to stop being a room anyone could safely cross without a hand held out in front of them. It meant it was time to be somewhere specific: a bed, a blanket, a sister's voice in the next bunk, before the light went the rest of the way down. What did a family actually learn to do inside that shrinking circle of light, in the years before anyone thought to ask what it was teaching them? Carrying the lamp itself, not merely sitting near it, but lifting it by its wire handle and walking it across the room, or out onto the porch, or down the 2 log steps toward the outhouse path, belonged, in the Sutherland cabin, to Fiona alone, and only once she had turned 9. This was not a formal ceremony. Nobody stood her in front of the family and announced it. It simply became, one particular July, the thing she was now the one who did, while Callum still waited to be old enough. She understood, without being told this either, that she had been handed something adult, a task that required steady hands, unhurried footing, and the specific responsibility of being the only source of light for whoever was walking behind her in the dark. It was in that same lamplit hour, after Callum and Fiona had gone to their bunks, and the flame had been turned low rather than out, low enough to save fuel, bright enough that neither parent wanted to sit in true dark, that Robert and Jean did their own talking. Regional cottage oral histories from this period describe this exact pattern consistently. With the children settled and the lamp turned down rather than extinguished, the low, late hour became the one time in a family's week when a husband and wife spoke without an audience and without the day's tasks pulling at either of them. There was, quite simply, nothing else to look at, no page to read by that dim a flame, no task left undone that couldn't wait for morning light, just 2 adults, a low lamp, and whatever needed saying that a full day of hauling water, tending a wick, and watching 2 children hadn't left room for. What did that low, late lamp actually permit a husband and wife to say to each other that a bright kitchen in Toronto, at almost any hour, would not have? None of this ran without real cost, and the channel's documentation of it would be incomplete, even dishonest, if it treated the coal oil lamp only as an instrument of togetherness, and left out what it also was: an open flame, burning unattended fuel, inside a wooden building with no running water on hand to fight a fire that got away from it. Regional fire insurance and cottage association records from this period consistently list lamp and stove fires among the most common causes of loss at unwired lakeshore cottages, and every family that kept one running knew the specific rules that came with it. The coal oil can stored outside, never refilled near an open flame. The lamp itself never left burning in a room with no adult awake in it. Food storage carried its own limits. An icebox, restocked by a boat that came round the lake roughly twice a week. a documented pattern across Haliburton's unwired lakes in this period, much as it was on the Hawk Lakes, kept milk and meat only as cold, and only for as long, as the ice itself lasted. And after dark, the lake's edge itself turned genuinely hazardous for a family with no dock lighting and no porch light to mark where solid ground ended. Children were taught early and firmly never to walk toward the water at night without a lamp in hand, because the drop from dock to lake in full darkness gave no warning at all. This was not a romantic hardship. It was a real one, managed daily by people who had no illusions about what an open flame and a dark shoreline could do to a family, and who built their evening rituals, in part, specifically around containing that risk. Given everything the lamp cost a family to keep safely, what made an entire region of cottagers choose it, summer after summer, for as long as they did? To understand why a family like the Sutherlands accepted all of this, year after year, it helps to understand what Haliburton cottage country actually was in the 1950s, and what it was not. It was not Muskoka. Lake Rousseau and Lake Joseph, an hour or more to the west, had been steamship and railway resort country since before the First World War, with professionally built cottages, established boat services, and, by the 1950s, hydro lines running to most of the lakeshore. Halls Lake and the Hawk Lakes, by contrast, had been logging and hunt camp country within living memory of the very families now cottaging there. Post-war road building, roads pushed through specifically to open lakes like Big Hawk to summer traffic, was still recent history in 1957, not a settled inheritance. Highway 35 itself, the single road connecting Toronto to the region, was not fully paved along its Haliburton stretch until the very end of the decade. What this meant, in practical terms, was that a Toronto tradesman's family of modest means, a pressman, not a bank manager or a manufacturer, could afford a lake lot and build a cabin themselves in a way that would already have been financially out of reach on the more developed lakes to the west. The unwired, self-built cabin was not simply what the Sutherlands settled for. It was, in a very direct sense, what made a family like theirs cottagers at all. Regional Cottage Association records document this class geography plainly. Haliburton in this period drew exactly the families for whom roughing it was not a weekend theme, but the actual load-bearing condition of being able to own a place on a lake at all. What did it mean, in a region organized this way, that some families' cottages had power years before others on the very same lake? The reason Halls Lake waited as long as it did was not an accident of geography, it was policy. Ontario's rural electrification program, run by the Hydroelectric Power Commission, had always run on a farm-first order of priority. Understandable, since farms were year-round operations, and a farm without power was a working household without power 12 months of the year, not merely 8 or 10 weeks of it. The Commission's 1946 five-year plan of post-war rural hydro development reached 85% of Ontario farms within 4 years. Recreational, seasonal shoreline properties were never the target of that plan, and by 1958, when the province formally withdrew its grant and aid for new rural line construction across the whole of Old Ontario, everything south of Lake Nipissing, Haliburton included, many lake associations were still years from a line reaching their own shore. What this produced, across cottage country generally, was a genuine and openly acknowledged pride in going without. Families who had kept a lamp cabin the longest sometimes spoke of it, within their own cottage associations, almost as a credential, proof of an older, more self-reliant claim to the lake than a newly wired cottage 2 lots down could offer. This was never simply deprivation accepted grudgingly. It carried its own social weight, in a region where a family's years without power could function, quietly, as a measure of how long they had actually belonged there. When the wire finally did reach a lake like this one, what specifically changed, and what, if anything, Was anyone prepared for it to cost them? If this channel is going to keep documenting what the Canadian cottage summer meant to the people who made it their yearly ritual, subscribe. There are more lakes, more lamplit tables, more fishing trips at dawn, and more quiet evenings that were the best part of someone's whole year, and were never described that way at the time, because they didn't need to be. A lamp cabin gave a family something a fully wired house rarely manages on its own: one lit room, and no good reason for anyone to be anywhere else in it. And if you have a memory of a cabin, a lamp, a song, a fishing trip, a sky full of stars over a lake, put it in the comments. Did your own family cottage have electricity when you were young, or do you remember the lamp that had to be lit by hand every single night? Next time, the island cottages of Georgian Bay, where a neighbor's fire seen across dark water was the only sign anyone else was out there at all. The Sutherland's cabin on Halls Lake got hydroelectric service in 1961. The lamp table stayed exactly where it had always stood. What hydro gave the Sutherlands? A bulb that needed no wick trimmed, no chimney wiped of soot each morning, no fuel carried in from Minden by car or boat. Eventually, a small electric refrigerator to replace the icebox Pete's boat had kept stocked twice a week. What it did not give them: a reason for the whole family to sit at the same table, inside the same 6 feet of light, because there was nowhere else in the cabin the evening could actually happen. Jean Sutherland did not know this was what the lamp had been doing all those summers. She knew it the first evening Callum carried his supper plate into the next room, because for the first time in his life, there was a light switch waiting for him there too. The lamp had known what to do with all 4 of them, every night, in one room. No one had thought to tell the electric bulb to ask.